Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 208 of the Kiss Army Nation podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Pasquale Veri.
And I am Claudius Pera. Welcome to the show, everyone.
So today we're diving into one of the most misunderstood yet remarkable chapters in KISStory, the years between 1980 and 1983. While some fans and critics view this as a transitional period, the truth is KISS was far from fading. In fact, they were thriving in new and exciting ways. On today's panel, we'll be celebrating the successes, surprises, and standout moments of this era, a time when the band's global reach expanded, their shows remained legendary, and a new chapter in KISStory was being written.
So it is always such a pleasure to tackle this topic with returning panel guest Patrick De Montigny and Eric Brunet. Nice to see you guys.
Hello.
So like we do in most of our discussion panels, so let's start with a little warm-up question. So in this episode, we'll be talking about the successes of the 1980 to 1983 era, as Pask said in the introduction. But if we span their entire career, in your opinion, guys, so what was the band's greatest achievement? That's a tough one. So Patrick, let's start with you.
To prove their critics wrong, because early in their career, they were told this is going to be very short-lived and KISS will be a fad that will pass. And 50 years later, okay, they're not like they were in the last 3 years of the 70s, but still what they accomplished since then is no less remarkable. And they did prove their critics wrong.
Okay, that's a good one. Eric, what do you think?
I think, honestly, as a fan of the early years, I think that their greatest achievement was the Alive album. Not only did it save their career, but it basically saved Casablanca Records. The first three studio albums, as great as they were, and I mean, I think we all agree now that that's a very classic era of KISS. That's very sentimental and precious to all of us as longtime fans. The record sales just weren't there. And I think their future was very, very ambiguous in terms of the record label. Also, the record label had suffered a lot because they released an album called Here's Johnny, the greatest moments of the Tonight Show, which was a double album, which they thought was going to be an amazing success, but it flopped. So Alive, basically Alive saved the record company. It saved KISS's career. And in the process, it also influenced a whole generation of rock musicians, in particular Ace Frehley, but I mean, the whole band. So I think that was their greatest achievement.
Okay. Pask, what's your take?
I don't want to sound judgmental here, but if you look at a lot of the bands and the music today, especially stuff that, teenagers are listening to, you can't help wonder, are these bands going to last or make the distance? Are they going to last 50 years like KISS has? And I've got to say no. And we're also looking at all of these supergroups, retiring, ending their career. And once the supergroups are gone, what's going to be left? We're still going to have amazing music, and we're seeing amazing music today, but never to the level of the super band. So for me, that KISS lasted 50 years was an incredible achievement by any band. And I always make the argument, if someone says, oh, KISS sucks or this, and I go, you know what? They lasted 50 years. And they must have done something right.
Yeah.
So for sure, that for me is their greatest achievement, longevity.
Okay, good. In my case, I think it's a combination of things. I don't want to spread out, too much on the response, but I think, their greatest achievement is basically the marriage of music, theater, and marketing. So I think that what KISS created, I think we all agree that they have not revolutionized, music in terms of composition or that kind of stuff. To me, their greatest legacy is how they redefined what it meant to be a rock band. So from performance to marketing to fan connection. To me, that's a signature stamp that it's going to stay with KISS for the longest time.
Now, once again, Patrick, thank you so much for another excellent topic. And I'm glad we're doing this particular episode because I think we're in a time when Kiss fans are constantly focusing on the negative when it comes to the band. And I want to focus more on the positive. I think fans should focus more on the positive. So, Pat, I want to ask you this before we start. It's interesting that you chose this particular time period to celebrate. There's so many periods or eras to choose from. Why did you choose for this particular topic 80-83?
Only because, if you guys remember, it was a time where Kiss was a dead issue. Heavy metal was doing great, but Kiss, since they had gone the pop route, was like felt, if I can say, I can use the word betrayed. So people left them, and the pop fans didn't really care for them either. So it was a period where they were really at a, how can I say, they were at crossroads, really. Now, I think no matter what, you could still read about them in 16 and things like that, but it was obviously was not the 70s. And the fact that they came out of that is really something, because a lot of bands would have just given up, whereas they chose to go ahead and say, okay, let's, even if it was probably depressing for them, they still had the drive to do it. So I think that's why that period is such a very unique period for the band.
Okay.
So let's begin the celebration, guys. So we're gonna start off with Unmasked. I guess we all agree that the album marked a shift in Kiss's sound. So the album was well received globally, especially in Australia, leading to a massive successful tour down there. So what made that tour such a cultural phenomenon in Australia? Why do you think that happened? Eric, I would like to start with you this time.
I think honestly, it was a lot of the anticipation, because you have to remember that was the first time they had been down there. They had toured Japan for the first time in '77, but they'd never been to Australia. Also, I recently read a book, a biography of Malcolm Young from AC/DC, and the book was emphatic about how charts and musical success in Australia in the '70s, mid '70s, late '70s was very much geared towards more commercial artists. John Denver, ABBA, those bands were super popular in Australia. So while, American fans might have taken the disco and the pop approach, the disco approach of Dynasty and the pop approach of Unmasked as a betrayal, I think probably that musical genre was right down the alley of most Australian listeners, that commercial type of lighter approach. So I think it was basically a combination of their absence for such a long time on the touring stages. They'd never toured there before, so the anticipation was sky high. The hype, you look at the TV clips, how it was hyped up. Even 60 Minutes did a piece on them.
Yeah.
So a combination of the hype, the anticipation, and the fact that Unmasked was very much in line with what Australian audiences were consuming as far as music.
Great point. Patrick, what do you think?
I probably for the same reasons Eric just mentioned, but also I think very few fans know this, but there was talks about them going to Australia after the Japan tour in '77. So for some reason that didn't happen. So probably, the hardcore fans, because they were already happening over there, and probably the fans were like sort of let down. And then for now, this time in 1980, it's for real. So it's like, wow, this is really happening. And probably they were the thing over there. When you watch something like there was a Australian TV special that we've all seen. Inner Sanctum.
Sanctum.
You can see, how big they were over there and all the anticipation. I mean, it was just like I wonder if they had anything like that in the US, actually. it makes you wonder. They were big, but a phenomenon like that, I think it only happened in Australia and then later on in South America.
Hmm.
But it was a very short fad. Um, but it's funny because I always found that Unmasked for some reason was a darker record than Dynasty. So therefore, it was surprising that in Australia it was such a big deal. So I think it was because probably it was their first visit and it was such highly anticipated that that's the reason why it got so big. And they were. It's funny because here they were fading, but over there they were like.
Yeah,
Can you imagine the band how they felt being over there? It helped them forget what was going on at home.
yeah. Pask?
We often hear that Kiss wasn't successful in the early 80s, between 80 and 83. No, maybe they weren't successful in the US or in North America, but obviously they were successful abroad. Why? Because there was a need. There was still a want for the band. There was a hunger for the band that other countries didn't get. The US got so saturated with Kiss, whether Unmasked was the album that it was, or if it was a hard rock album, would their success have continued like it was in 77, 78? I'm not so sure. There's only so much of that you could handle. So for sure their success would wane. The interest of North Americans would wane. But it makes absolute sense that they were huge in Australia because they didn't get to see Kiss as much. And for them, it was like, wow, we're getting to experience what their experience. I mean, what happened in Australia was similar to what was going on in North America in 77 and 78.
Right.
So did the interest really, really wane? Did the success really wane? No, they were just as successful, just somewhere else.
Yeah, that's right. Excellent. Well, I love the fact that you point that out because most of the time we tend to judge Kiss's success based only in North America, but there was so much other stuff going on, and I think the Unmasked tour it became one of the most iconic moments in Australian rock history. So there's. I fully agree with Eric. I think it was a combination of timing, a lot of hype. There was a media frenzy all over the place, and then of course it was the fan obsession. So all the all the reputation of the live show and the pyrotechnics and the costumes and all of that. It built up so much expectation that it was an unforgettable moment. And let me just take a few moments to say that, of course, Australia was really, really well known in KISStory as a big milestone, but 1980 was actually the time when Kiss was actually big, and it has a lot of acceptance and in South America. And I'm telling this because I come from there, and because of political reasons, dictatorships and all of that, we were not exposed to Kiss in the 70s. We didn't know those guys existed. They were banned. So, and in some countries in Europe, it's the same thing. So it's not a coincidence that in the 80s, they were touring Europe. They were going to Australia. They couldn't go down south till 83 to Brazil. But I remember there was a big announcement in 1979 when Dynasty was released that they were going to tour Argentina in Buenos Aires. But then all of a sudden, everything went down. But I think it was a smart move for Kiss to explore other markets. And when they saw what the reaction was, it was a no-brainer that gave them a breath of fresh air, for the band.
So the next question is interesting because we can't talk about the band's success in the 80s, like 80, 83, without mentioning Eric Carr, of course. My question is, would that era have been as successful without Eric Carr? Pat, what do you think?
Eric Carr fans are going to hate me for this, but I think so. I think it would have, because the reasons we talked about is that they were people were expecting Kiss, and I think, although I will say that the addition of Eric was like something else to talk about. Say, oh, and by the way, they've got this amazing new drummer, and his name is Eric Carr. New personality, so it added to the phenomenon over there. So I think they would have been just as successful because Dynasty was big over there in Australia. I think Dynasty and Unmasked did better in Europe and Australia, as a matter of fact. And up to that point, Eric was not in the band. So there was an anticipation anyways.
Mm.
But the fact that Eric joined added more stigma, I think. It's like they've got this new guy, he's unbelievable. And proof, when Eric was doing his drum solo in Australia, they'd say, Eric, Eric. So it added like magic to the whole thing. But I believe if they would have been there with Peter, it would have been like, oh, cool, you know. They would have still had a success, I think.
Okay, makes sense. Eric, what do you think about Eric?
Well, I think honestly that's a loaded question because in terms of a technical level, there were drummers that were a lot better than Eric Carr, especially in the 80s. But he had a style that fit the 80s perfectly. And I think especially in the early 80s, before they started speeding up tempos to ridiculous speeds, like around 87 and 88, I think he did a really great job. I also think that because he had such an endearing personality and his character resonated with so many people, he kind of became the accessible one to fans that, you know, Gene and Paul by that point, you know, were superstars and not so readily accessible to fans, but he kind of became the liaison between the fans and the band. Later on, it was also a little bit Bruce Kulick, but Bruce Kulick came in 1984, which is outside the frame of reference we're talking about. I think Eric was a huge part of that. You compare like Largo 79, the video, to Sydney 1980, and the enthusiasm level, the intensity level, his vocals, even on Black Diamond, I love. It gave it a harder edge, even though it was a pop type album, the vocals on Black Diamond. And of course, the thing that we have to mention is the iconic drum sound of Creatures of the Night. Now, of course, a lot of that had to do with the producer and ambient miking and recording techniques. But would it have been such a thunderous, astounding, bombastic sound with another drummer? We'll never know. But that sound is like, that drum sound on that album is as iconic as Paul's vocals or Gene's bass playing. It's just a fantastic, like basically that set the bar for heavy metal drumming in the 80s, that sound that Michael James Jackson captured for Creatures. So I believe that Eric Carr is a big part of that success. Might someone else have just snuck in and put the makeup on and been equally as big of a success with the band and led the band to that kind of success? Sure, but I mean, we'll never know.
Okay, Claudio?
I think that Eric redefined the band. You know, he gave the band a new sound. He brought up a new Fox persona, which I think it helped modernize a bit, not only the sound, but also, as Eric just said, the stage energy. So people were a bit tired of the four iconic faces and all of that. And you could tell that in the last trench, when Peter was playing live, the band was already, off. So I think the success that the band had in that era is not only thanks to Eric, but he had a huge contribution on redefining this I would say the phase two of the band, because everybody thought that, for instance, I'm going to come back to the South America's thing. So in Canada and maybe US, when Peter left, many fans basically, they went away. So they disappeared. They for them, it was the original lineup. While in Australia and Europe, and South America. So it was a fresh, a new change or something. There were not so many people so attached to Peter at that time. So it was, Eric was welcomed, and he was so humble. He had such a beautiful personality that he fit in. So a huge contribution, to the new era. Absolutely.
No, listen, you can't take away Eric's contribution to the band in the 80s. Absolutely. He was the perfect fit for the band. He elevated the band to new heights because of his drumming, like Eric said, from, Creatures of the Night is a great example of that. But the question is, would that era have been as successful without Eric? And like Eric said, our Eric said, we'll never know. Because it wasn't the Eric Carr show, it was KISS.
Yeah.
So I think what happened during that era would have still happened with or without Eric Carr, depending on the drummer that they would have gotten. And like Eric said, our Eric said, there's a lot of other drummers out there, possibly better drummers than Eric Carr. Who knows who they could have gotten? But I think regardless of who they got, I think they would have been as successful during that time. But having said that, thank God they got Eric Carr during that period, because my God, what he brought to the band was second to none.
Great point. So now let's move into spectacle. We know that KISS being such a visual band, well known for their pyrotechnics and different stages. The band's evolving stage shows in the early 80s were still a major draw. So how did KISS manage to maintain the reputation as a live act during this transitional time? Pasc, what do you think?
That's a good question, because during that period, yes, their music changed with Dynasty, Unmasked, The Elder, but their stage performance didn't. Regardless of what they played up on that stage, man, it was completely bombastic. When they played stuff from Unmasked, it was completely bombastic. And too bad they didn't do a show revolving around the Elder. Who knows what they could have done?
Yeah.
I can guarantee it would have been bombastic. Seeing what we saw recently with Joey Casada playing the whole Elder album. It was amazing. Seeing what Bruce and his band does with those era songs are amazing. Imagine what KISS could have done, So, listen, what's really important about this band absolutely is the music. But let's be honest. They're known for their stage show, especially in the 80s, especially in the 70s. And again, I said this 1,000 times. I was there. I remember people talking about the shows and less about the music. The music changed. People cared less about that. But man, the show didn't. And that's what people really cared about.
Good stuff. Pat?
Yeah, I think even when they dropped the makeup, they said, we will still put on an amazing show. Although that came after it happened in 83, but they actually started to get known without makeup in 84. And they kept their promise, because they were always about putting an energetic show. And the makeup didn't do it for them. But their performance and what they put in the concert, they still cared about having a great stage show. Although maybe after Animalize it was a little less, but still, I think they always cared about what they put in as a concert. And I think even like the Creatures stage show was amazing. It was really amazing for the time. I think they always cared about that. So in a sense, KISS has always been a live act. They couldn't be a studio band, put it that way. So yeah, so they kept their promise for sure of being always like an amazing live band.
Eric?
Well, we mentioned about how we usually think of KISS in terms of success in North America. And this question, it's like, I struggled with it a bit because you have to remember between 1980 until the end of 82, there were no North American shows apart from the Palladium, which is where Eric Carr was introduced. And that was a very scaled down stage that was kind of reminiscent a little bit of Dynasty. And the Unmasked tour was also kind of like with those ramps off to the side. So compared to what we saw in 77, and in 79 even in North America. In terms of the actual staging, what they brought to Europe and Australia was a bit scaled down. The energy was certainly not scaled down. The energy was still there, and I think Eric Carr was a big part of that because he brought so much energy. But man, in late 82, 83, did they ever come back with a vengeance with Creatures? Because to me, that is a very sentimental time, because I was more a fan of like the early Kiss, like everything that led up to Alive. And I think there's really parallels there between like the Dress to Kill shows and the Alive shows and the Creatures of the Night show.
I agree.
And a lot of people might say, well, that's ridiculous because, first of all, Ace and Peter weren't there. But what I'm talking about is the ferocity and the lack of concession to commercial type of viability. They just went out there and they completely kicked ass. They didn't care about who they offended. They, for better or for worse, they introduced swearing into the show, which I had mixed feelings about. But at the same time, too, at a time when, you know, people were protesting the satanic aspects of heavy metal, they had actually what I thought was one of the most impressive Gene bass solos with the tolling bell, and then the fog rolls in, and then he's basically molesting his bass, and he actually makes a crucifix out of it with the neck. And you know, it was like basically them saying, you know, this is like Kiss, and you know, a lot of people don't like this, and there's protesters outside, and there's parents in the audience with their kids because those are still holdovers from the Dynasty tour. But it's kind of like the middle finger. This is like defiantly stating that we are Kiss and this is what we do. And I thought, to me, that was the most purest form of Kiss since about 1975 or so. Because for me, things started getting a little too glitzy and a little too commercial as far back as Destroyer, even though I love the album, the tour. But that tour, like if you ask me favorite tours, it would probably be Hotter Than Hell, the Alive tour, and the Creatures tour.
Okay. Wow. So there's nothing else that I could add to what Eric just said. You know, he summarized basically all the good reasons why, you know, they kept their promise and they kept their commitment. We all know that, you know, Kiss understood that the live experience was their brand. Okay, it was not just the music, you know, so they adapted everything that was going on at that time to put it on the stage. And the best example is what happened with Creatures of the Night. So I think that also the fact of introducing Eric Carr and Vinnie Vincent was another interesting point, you know, for a stage and for the live act. I think the injection of new blood helped Kiss to stay musically relevant and visually fresh. As I said before, people were a little bit tired of the original lineup at that time. And, you know, Patrick said that, and Eric and Pask, you know, a separate chapter for Creatures of the Night. I think it was a theatrical pick for the band, you know, introducing the tank stage, you know, the armor-like costumes, and Eric's drum solo, and actually what Gene was doing live too. So that was I think a hell of a live performance for the band at that time. So that's why I'm saying, you know, musically, you know, they might have shifted a little bit, but when you went to see a Kiss show, you got what you paid for.
I was in class today, and someone asked me, Mr. Very, what's your motto? I said simple, turning a negative into a positive. And you know, back in the day, Unmasked and The Elder were seen as failures. Were they really failures, right? Because sometimes you need to make mistakes in order to achieve great heights. And Creatures of the Night was hailed as a return to form, right? So my question is, did Unmasked and Elder need to happen in order for Creatures to exist? Claudia, we'll start with you this time.
Absolutely. You know, it's you know, KISStory is so interesting. I think that things happen for a reason, and you know, the band has always tried to adapt to the time. They were trying to kind of go into experimentation with the Elder, with coming back to Bob Ethring, trying to come up with a theme or cinematic kind of album. Definitely, I think that they came back to the roots thanks to the fact that they had done, The Elder and Unmasked, and they were not commercially successful. So that was a wake-up call for me. So they said, this is not who we are. This is what we need to do. And again, I think that the introduction of Eric Carr and the writing of Vinny helped the band propel to another level. So definitely yes. Yeah.
Okay. Eric, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think so, right? It's like the butterfly effect. Like if you change one thing, it throws everything else off course. And I think the Unmasked and Elder needed to happen. Honestly, I think that the guys in KISS, especially at that point, Paul and Gene, are a lot more artistic and creative than they get credit for. So, like a lot of other bands, like I love them to death, but like AC/DC, they could have constantly remade the same album over and over again because they can write that way easily. But I think they really wanted to spread their wings and be creative. I think they always had their ear to the pavement as to what was popular. And I think they were inspired by it, and they're never afraid to let it flow through their own vision of what KISS was. So did Unmasked and Elder need to happen in order for Creatures to exist? Yes, but even more so, I think that KISS Killers needed to happen for Creatures to exist because that was not a domestic release, but I think those 4 songs produced by Michael James Jackson are the magical bridge from Unmasked to Elder, where things started slowly getting back on track as terms of a definitive KISS sound. And that's kind of like that magical bridge that you take from the Unmasked and Elder material to Creatures, where you could tell that they were really starting to pick up steam again creatively. And you listen to a song like Nowhere to Run, which is so passionate and has so much energy to it. And really, it was kind of like a statement, that we're coming back, but, there's still a bit of work to do before we perfect it, which is why probably it was a non-domestic release, but the end result, the 4 songs, there's Nowhere to Run, I'm a Legend Tonight, Down on Your Knees, Partners in Crime, right. All of them fantastic songs.
Pat, what do you think?
I pretty much agree with every one of you. Yes, those 2 albums needed to happen because I think it was probably, how can I say, especially with The Elder, it was a slap in the face saying, okay, we just made something which artistically may be good, but this is not what people want. So therefore, we need to do something drastic. So I think if those albums hadn't happened, their return to a harder sound wouldn't have been as intense because yes, Unmasked and Dynasty were a success overseas, but The Elder was not a success anywhere in the world. And not because it was not a good album. I'm just saying that even in Australia, they couldn't get a tour over there. It was a year only prior, and they couldn't tour over there. They didn't get a tour anywhere. The album completely flopped, and it was probably like, whoa, how come this is happening to us? So in order, they were hungry again. I think they got back the hunger from the early days. I think that's why this needed to happen. So yes, definitely, I'm with you guys 100%. Those 2 albums needed to happen in order for us to get Creatures, which still to this day is one of a fan favorite, I think.
Oh yeah.
I like what Eric said about AC/DC. Yes, they basically recorded the same album over and over again. And KISS could have taken that route as well, and their music would never have changed. But it would never have reached the heights that it did. We never would have gotten a Creatures. We never would have gotten a Revenge because they realized, oh, listen, we got to step it up here. The way humanity works is basically we thrive on conflict, and it's that conflict that drives us. It's the unfortunate reality, but it's true, right? If things are too easy for us, we don't grow, we don't evolve. It's through conflict that we grow and evolve. That's how we change. And that's exactly what happened to Kiss. Now, in and of itself, yes, I like Unmasked. I like The Elder. I liked it less The Elder than back then. I like it more now. But as individual albums, I think they're good albums. But thank God they were made, because yes, I do believe that because of those albums, Creatures does exist, because the band realized we got to step it up or we're dead in the water, you know? Yeah. So, and now we're going back into the catalog and we're listening to a variety of music, which I think is fantastic. How many bands could claim that? When we listen to hard rock and metal and disco and pop, you've got it all here. You've got it all. It's, you know, a true music lover should love Kiss because their music has so much to offer.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
This is such a great discussion, and of course, you know, with 50 years career, there's so many successes. But if we concentrate on 80 to 83, I think we could be, you know, keep going with this episode for hours, because there's so much good stuff in it that we can find there. Mm-hmm. But just as a quick summary, so in your opinion, Pat, I'm going to start with you. What are the top 5 successes for the band in the 80 to 83 era?
Well, definitely Creatures of the Night. The album, 1. The tour, 2, even though the tour was cut short. One of their best tours, because they were so on fire. I think all 4 of us know that. It's the evidence is there. Other accomplishment too, this may sound weird, but in 83, when they took off the makeup.
Yeah.
At some point, Kiss, even though the energy was there with Creatures and everything, and how amazing and raw that was, for the general public, it was like, oh yeah, they're passé. So, by them saying, okay, we're going to drop the makeup, they took a huge risk, because it could have been also the final nail in the coffin. But for some reason, it did bring a little bit of interest. They should have done it a little earlier in the marketing sense, not in the historical sense. It should have happened a little earlier, because it felt like when they did it, it was like, oh, for the 2 or 3 people who still care, here's Kiss without makeup. That's how it felt. But it did give a little bit of spark after that, because I think Lick It Up was the first album that went platinum. So that's achievement number 4, the first album to go platinum since Dynasty. Which, if you consider everything that they had been through since 1980, was a major success. And also, good achievement. I know this is debatable, and a lot of people could say no, but I think bring Vinny, even if it was short-lived, into the band. I believe they had the intention of wanting to return to a hard rock sound even before they brought him in, but he helped complete the process. So I think, to me, those are the 5 major achievements in that period.
Okay, fantastic. Eric, what do you think?
Top 5 successes would be, for me, hiring Eric Carr to replace Peter Criss. When a band as large as or as big as Kiss loses an original member, it can go in all sorts of different directions. In terms of personality, in terms of character, in terms of how relatable he was to the fans. From the time they introduced him on Kids Are People Too, it was virtually impossible not to like him, because he seemed like such a good person. And you saw how the kids gravitated towards him. So, they could have hired someone else who was more highly skilled than he was, who had a horrible personality, who would have come out like I won't name them, but who would have come out with a big head and not been so endearing. But the fact that he was so endearing, so fan-friendly, and he just radiated that he was a good person, was something I think that allowed the transition to a new lineup of the band, and which led to some of their great success, like the Australia 1980 tour, and the... on another level, too, his skill as a metal drummer. Like I said before, Creatures album without Eric Carr would not have been the Creatures album.
Correct.
For me, the second big success is Australia 1980. They often say, when bands are starting to go down a little bit in the domestic front, there's no other choice but to look at the international foreign market, which is why a lot of bands now, they used to say, are big in Japan, meaning that they're dead in the US, but they're big in Japan. And that almost applies to almost every hair metal band in the 80s that still has a following now in Japan and is even touring now in 2025. Some of those bands have huge followings there. So they went to Australia for the first time, and as you can tell from the video footage that survives from that era, it was kind of like a equivalent of Beatlemania, kind of like when the Beatles first arrived on American shores.
Mm-hmm.
The fans sleeping out of the hotel and waiting at the airport, and the huge crowds and the outdoor shows and just the mass media coverage. For me, the third thing is the Creatures album. And the Creatures album in tour. To me, it just goes to show how people were determined not to like them in 1983 as far as domestic audiences and record buying public. Because whenever people think of the defining album from that time period, they always mention Motley Crue's Shout at the Devil, which is a fantastic album. And I love that album. And it's one of my favorite albums. But I listen to, and I tell myself, like, how come there was so much like cult status and so much love for Shout at the Devil, but there was nothing for Creatures of the Night at that point, when really they're almost like similar albums. Granted, the Kiss one is a lot more refined in terms of sound. So, and ironically enough, they even toured together on that tour. Mm-hmm. So creatively, I think the Creatures album is one of their crowning moments in terms of studio, in terms of songwriting. And actually, I'll get back to it for my fifth point. So the fourth success would be the South American tour. Yeah. There were a whole bunch of reasons why it shouldn't happen. They had tried to go to Argentina previously, and I remember there had been some sort of like terrorist threat against them, and they had to cancel the tour, and it turned out to, nothing basically. But they went there and they won over a whole new continent. They played to some of their biggest audiences. I can't even tell you how big the audience was, because every time Gene does an interview, the number grows. I think it started at like 183, then it went to 360, and now it's at 500,000. So I'm
wondering if he adds all the shows, to get to
maybe I don't know, or maybe now he's counting. He's counting the babies that Kiss fathered while they were in South America as part of the audience, like the pregnant audience members. I don't know, but you look at the footage at Rio de Janeiro, and they were a machine. Yeah. They were basically a well-oiled musical machine with Vinny, and you have to give Vinny his due. A metal machine playing literally for an ocean of people that were so enraptured by what was going on. And for me, the fifth point, in terms of success, it's a very micro level success for me, but a creative one. I thought "I Still Love You," which is a very contentious song on Creatures of the Night, was really a step up in the songwriting. And I know Vinny had probably a lot to do with that, but I mean, Paul always referenced like Led Zeppelin and bands like that influenced them. And I listen to "I Still Love You," and I think of songs like "Since I've Been Loving You" off of Led Zeppelin 3, the dramatic aspect, the more epic nature of the song. It was just a song that to me, I was like the songwriting, the production of it. I'm telling myself, man, this is a band that is, spreading their wings and expanding to a more mature level of songwriting. Because of course that was always the critique in the 70s, the put your hand in my pocket, grab onto my rocket thing, and the critics would be like, this is, cock rock basically for adolescents. But "I Still Love You" was a different thing. So, and of course, when you see it now on MTV Unplugged, it sounds like an absolute monster of a song. So those were my five crowning achievements from 80 to 83.
Awesome. Super. Pask.
Can we really argue that the period between 80 and 83 was not successful? I don't believe that we can possibly argue that it wasn't successful. It was so freaking successful. Think about it. Kiss was about turning points. In their 50 years, there were so many turning points in their career. We Got Alive, turning point, Destroyer, Creatures, Makeup Coming Off, The Reunion, The Revenge album, The Unplugged session. So many examples of turning points in their career that spans 50 years. Now look at 80 and 83. There are so many turning points just within that small period of time. It's freaking incredible. Tell me any other era where there was as many turning points as 80, 83, right?
In only 3 years. Yeah,
right?
that's right.
It's just
yeah.
those 3 years. What an amazing 3 years. I wish I hadn't checked out before that because it was an amazing era. I mean, okay, so what are some of those turning points? You guys already talked about this already. Definitely Creatures was a huge turning point. But also, Unmasked and The Elder were turning points. But when I say a turning point, it doesn't always mean for the better. Sometimes those turning points are for the worse, right? And unfortunately, Unmasked and Elder wasn't exactly a positive turning point, but it was a necessary one, like we mentioned before, for Creatures to happen. So that's a good thing. That's a positive thing. That's an amazing turning point for Unmasked and The Elder. And then, of course, they weren't big enough in North America. They were huge in Australia. An amazing turning point. They were as big as 77, 78 at that time.
Yeah.
Mhm.
An incredible turning point. And Pat, I agree with you. Taking off the makeup was a huge turning point at that time. And I don't understand how MTV didn't make a bigger deal out of it. There was nothing, but it was a huge turning point. So much happened in those 3 years. And I don't know any other time in the period's 50 years where so much happened. What an incredible era that was.
Yeah.
Again, how could we possibly say it wasn't successful? No way. No way.
That's so interesting. We mentioned that before. So while this era is often remembered for decline, because we read stuff from the U.S. or North America and what was happening with the band down here, I think it was also a period of necessary reinvention. I think that without the enduring fire of this era, 1980 to 83, musically speaking, personally and commercially, I don't think that KISS might have survived, to become one of rock's most enduring bands and brands. So here's my 5. So basically, you cover it all. I'm gonna go with the Australian tour. No doubt about it. The introduction of Eric Carr, I think it brought some new energy and awesome playing. And as Eric said, Creatures could have never existed without Eric Carr. The album Creatures of the Night, that's in itself that's a huge milestone in KISStory. I think that keeping up the spectacle, the live act, that's another huge accomplishment for the band during those 3 years. Mainly thanks to the Creatures of the Night stage, with the tank and all the stuff. And I'm gonna use this just to compliment what Eric was saying. The huge tour in Brazil, where they played 3 shows. Rio in Maracanã. That's the most known stuff, because the other 2 cities, Sao Paulo and Belo Horizonte, they're also, they were also huge, and there was a great attendance. But, historically speaking, when you play Maracanã, it means that it's everything, for South America. And again, I'm going to agree with Pat, Vinnie Vincent. So his entry into the band, the songwriting talent of that guy was something unbelievable.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of I think a lot of credit for Creatures of the Night is thanks to Vinnie. And Lick It Up, it's another awesome album. And I think that the fact of having Vinnie into the band led to the unmasking also. Maybe not because of his personality, but because of the era, and because it was like the cherry on the pie for the makeup days. And the unmasking is also another huge. The timing was perfect. Now the story says that they are savvy, marketing and business, but to me that was the last resource, just to survive. But it brought fantastic, results.
Guys, we can end this episode without giving a shout out to Kiss Army things. Xander and Daphne brings a youthful, positive energy to that show when they discuss everything Kiss. And every Monday, I listen to that podcast on the way to work. And by the time I get into the parking lot of my school, I always get out of the car with a smile on my face because they remind us how amazingly special the band is and how we got to focus on the positive and enjoy it while it's still around, because one day it will not be. And just like that show does to me every Monday morning, this episode has done it for me today. I'm gonna leave this episode with a smile on my face, because here we are after all these years, and we've been fans since like the mid 70s, early 70s, and we still have this passion for the band. That's incredible. And if we're talking about, I know, a positive regarding Kiss, that they're able to have fans that still maintain this level of passion after all these years, says something about the band, because they present us, they give us so much. I don't know of any other band that has done that or could possibly do that. I think it's really incredible. And every once in a while, I've got moments where, oh man, I'm done. I want to move on. But you know what? It doesn't last very long, because I'm always reminded of the positivity, what this band has brought to my life. Friends like you guys, again, once in a lifetime opportunities, many times over. What an incredible life I've led. And I wouldn't want that to ever change. And I wouldn't go back and change a thing. It's people would never, a non-fan would never understand this, but thank God that we do.
Yeah.
And I wish more people understood what this band means to us. And this is why we have our fan profiles. If you listen to our show, the passion these people have for this band, it's really incredible. So guys, thank you so much for coming on the show and bringing so much positivity to an era that wasn't seen as so positive. But I hope people realize that it was really an incredible era. And Pat, thank you so much for bringing this era up, because it was absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
A lot of fun, as always.
Of course, I'm going to echo with what Paz just said, and I could have never imagined, discussing this after 50 years, discussing Unmasked and Creatures of the Night and the Rio shows and Australia. But there's always, something extra, we dissect, and we don't go into the technical details, but it's more the experiences and how each one of us lived through those experiences. And, it's always great to have you on the show, Eric and Pat, your insight and your experiences and, how you live through these moments. It's always so enriching. So thank you so much, guys, for being on the show. Thank you.
Always fun.
Always a great time.
Until the next time. So to the Kiss Army, we hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas, please send them to talktome@kissarmynationpodcast.com. Until next time, remember, never stop rocking. Stay positive. Take care, everyone.